the journalist in residence, C21 Media. Ed Waller is here to cover the event during the whole week, but he's also one of our members here as a faculty member, and it'll be interesting to see his synthesis of everything that has been said during this conversation, if you're gathering all those thoughts. And he will be hosting this afternoon one of the panel where basically the panelists will be able to exchange amongst themselves, which they haven't done today because we have such a rich contribution, but they will be able this afternoon to be able to dialogue amongst themselves and with you in the audience. And it's yours.
Thank you, Jack. I am the odd one out, slightly, being the journalist. I report on the international TV business, so I don't produce TV, I don't distribute TV, and I don't broadcast TV, I just write about it. So if the business, according to Bill, is all about hustle, 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 I think for me it's a little bit like being the eunuch at the orgy, just seeing everyone else doing their deals and just having to stand by and watch. But given that position, you do tend to see different trends emerging, different business models emerging, different techniques. Well, reiterating some of the points that have been said thus far, in the UK and across Europe, the drama slots, thanks to the recession, are now factual slots, often, because factual is cheaper than drama. So the recession has played into the hands of documentary producers to a certain extent, even though budgets for those shows are down. And likewise, networks are far more embracing the idea of co-production, as other people have said. So a conference about documentary co-production is very opportune and timely. For producers, particularly in the UK, we've seen that they're almost being forced into the co-production business because shows that would have previously been fully funded by their domestic network are only getting 70% of the budget. So they're forced to go to the international market either directly or through a distribution partner. That's not just because of the recession, it's also because of the change of legislation in the UK, where the rights to programmes was transferred from the broadcaster to the independent producer by an act of law. The unexpected, or perhaps should have been very expected consequence, was that broadcasters just said, well, we're not going to fully fund the shows anymore. So there became a bit of a bun fight as distributors began chasing after producers, and producers found themselves in a situation where they were getting pitched by distributors for the international rights to their shows if they were good shows and producers with records, good track records. So it changed the game a little bit in the UK, and so it's forced independent producers in the UK into the co-production market much more than perhaps the recession has forced the networks into the co-production business. Just to reiterate a point earlier about different sources of finance that producers are tapping into, particularly in the documentary space. Charities are becoming a very important source of finance for certain shows. Corporate brands, we've mentioned. Distributors as well are merging with co-production. They're deficit funding content that either previously would be fully funded. We're also seeing toy companies launching production arms, maybe not so much in the documentary space, but some documentaries have licensing and merchandising opportunities, and those companies are becoming far more aggressive in terms of co-production. Social networks are now sources of co-production finance, ad agencies, so they're exploiting the web's direct access to the consumer, and co-producers, production companies are doing that as well, being that they don't have to necessarily go through the gatekeeper of the broadcaster in the old model that Norm mentioned was no longer relevant. We're also seeing shows that are being produced entirely by what's called crowdfunding, where they don't go to any particular corporate source of finance, but they get micro payments from people who want to see that show, financed, $10 here, $20 there. There was a very good documentary called The World of Stupid about the imminent environmental disaster that was funded entirely by individuals who wanted to see that show over the internet, which meant that the producer of that show didn't have to cut their cloth according to some broadcaster's slot. They just got the money from the people that wanted to see that show, and hung on to all the rights accordingly. One last thing, I think we're running out of time a little bit, picking up some of the points that were mentioned by previous panellists about the way that some documentaries are becoming far more structured and formatted. We mentioned earlier about 1900 House, which sort of was about 10 years ago, and its various reiterations in different time periods. That borrowed the sort of format of a reality show and told a story about social history. But there's been more recent examples, such as Who Do You Think You Are, which is basically telling recent history through a celebrity-led sort of journey of self-discovery. I don't know if anyone knows that format, but it's basically discovering unknown ancestors of celebrities. So if you as a producer went to a network and said, I want to do a show about the Holocaust, for instance, you would be shuffled off into one particular department, and you might get a commission on a channel that is documentary skewed, and your budget would be much lower, and your audience would be people who watch Discovery or History Channel. Whereas if you said, we're going to tell a story about the Holocaust, but through the eyes of Lisa Kudrow, a celebrity from Friends, exploring ancestors she didn't know died at Auschwitz or something like that, then you would be taken to a different department with a higher budget. You would maybe go into a primetime slot on the main network, and you would reach a vastly different audience than you would do maybe on a documentary dedicated channel. Another more recent one is called The People Speak, which is a History Channel format where celebrities voice the diaries and dialogue of people historically involved in social upheavals, protests against Vietnam, what have you. So they put a celebrity skew on a subject which otherwise might not appeal to people who like to watch celebrities. So again, reaching a totally different audience by changing the format of your documentary, by borrowing a structure that is essentially maybe an entertainment format and telling your historical story through that format. Not only does it open up slots and budgets that are usually closed to documentary makers, it gives them a certain amount of intellectual property over and above their film or their series. And you can have a format that can then be exported internationally in the way that 1900 House has, Who Do You Think You Are has, and I'm sure The People Speak is going to be formatted in different countries. I think the UK is getting its own version soon. Maybe someone in Brazil could do a Brazilian version of The People Speak. Not only does that allow independent producers to think far beyond just satisfying their domestic clients, it allows them to plan international growth through the exploitation of that intellectual property, maybe even setting up production arms in other countries to produce local versions of that format, in the same way that formats more commonly associated with game shows or reality shows have allowed Endemol or Fremantle Media to expand globally. The company that came up with Who Do You Think You Are produces it now in the States. They don't just license the format to a local producer, they make it themselves. So embracing formats allows you to tell your story not only in a different way, but to a different audience with a much higher budget. And it also allows you to plan.
We're going to ask you to...
Sure. It's the bad luck at the tail end there. So
exactly.
I'll just wrap it up, and maybe we can pick up some of these points in one of the sessions.
Thank you very much.